Operation MK Mind Control in the Shadow. In the Cold War's paranoid early years, the Central Intelligence Agency embarked on a program to explore mind control and behavior modification. Under the codename MK, the agency conducted secret experiments on unwitting U.S. and Canadian citizens. Federal narcotics agent George Hunter White ran safe houses in New York and San Francisco where he dosed prostitutes and their clients with LSD and other drugs, then watched their behavior through one-way mirrors. These Operation Midnight Climax safe houses were part of a broader program that tested LSD, hypnosis, isolation, and sensory deprivation on inmates, hospital patients, and soldiers without their consent. A 1956 CIA memo even approved an experiment to evaluate the effects of large doses of LSD-25 on federal prisoners, highlighting how far officials were willing to go. The experiment sought to discover if drugs or psychological stressors could induce amnesia, influence behavior, or create a Manchurian candidate. In Montreal, psychiatrist Ewan Cameron used MK funding to subject patients at the Allen Memorial Institute to psychic driving. Patients expecting treatment for minor mental health issues were given massive doses of LSD, placed in sensory deprivation boxes, and forced to listen to repetitive taped messages for days or weeks, many left in a childlike state, unable to form new memories. When the program became public in the 1970s, it caused outrage and hearings. Families sued the CIA and the Canadian government. Although the agency shredded many records, declassified documents show a chilling willingness to treat human beings as test animals in the name of national security. Reflection. The MK story forces us to ask, how quickly can fear make ethics evaporate? When secrecy and national security become shields for illegal human experimentation, trust in institutions unravels. Many victims died years ago without knowing why their lives were shattered, a haunting reminder that truth can be buried just as effectively as bodies. Macabre Chronicle, Episode 4, Covert Experiments and Institutional Horror. Welcome back, travelers of the macabre. In this fourth installment of Macabre Chronicle, we venture into the shadows of 20th century science and society, places where governments, researchers, and religious institutions sanctioned horror in the name of progress or morality. We'll explore clandestine U.S. intelligence experiments on unsuspecting citizens, a shocking study that turned fluent children into stutterers, churches that became prisons for fallen women, and a prion disease spread by funeral cannibalism. We'll walk through a Soviet hiking tragedy shrouded in mystery, witness a cult's mass death, and expose horrific prison tests and secret biological attacks. Be warned, each story is unsettling and not for the faint of heart. Not all unethical experiments were hidden behind CIA doors. In 1939, at the height of behaviorist psychology, University of Iowa speech pathologist Wendell Johnson and graduate student Mary Tudor undertook what later became known as the Monster Study. The Monster Study, turning children into stutterers. They selected 22 orphans aged 5-15 and divided them into two groups. The positive group received praise for their speech and reassurance when they hesitated. The negative group was told that every mispronounced sound or pause meant they were failing and that they must avoid stuttering at all costs. These were healthy children with no speech impediments, yet after months of relentless criticism and humiliation, the children in the negative group developed whispering, hesitations, mouth clamping, and other stuttering behaviors. Some withdrew socially and felt permanent shame. Because they were orphans, the researchers could observe them for months, but they did not obtain their consent nor tell them the experiment's purpose. When Johnson published his work, he suppressed the negative results to protect his reputation. Decades later, the experiment was uncovered and condemned as a gross violation of the principle of beneficence. Research should never intentionally harm participants. Reflection. It's one thing to study a disorder to help those afflicted. It's another to create the disorder in healthy children. The Monster Study reveals how easily vulnerable populations can be exploited when researchers are blinded by their hypotheses. The orphan's speech and their trust were sacrificed for a thesis. Magdalene Laundries, a prison behind convent walls. Across Ireland from the late 19th to the mid-20th century, religious institutions known as Magdalene Laundries promised to reform fallen women, but behind their convent walls, Unmarried mothers, rape victims, girls deemed promiscuous, or those simply considered troublesome, were forced to work long hours cleaning clothes for wealthy hotels and hospitals. They received no pay and were forbidden from leaving. If they resisted, nuns pulled their hair, locked them in cold rooms, or denied them food. The Laundries claimed they offered shelter and moral rehabilitation, yet they separated mothers from infants at birth, automatically adopting out babies without consent. Many women died in these institutions, buried in unmarked graves on the grounds. The last Irish laundry closed only in 1996. For decades, the state denied involvement, but in 2013, the Irish government finally issued an apology and a compensation package for survivors. Reflection. The Magdalene laundries demonstrate how quickly morality can become a tool for oppression when combined with patriarchy and economic exploitation. Under the guise of faith, these institutions stole decades of women's lives, leaving scars that lasted long after the laundry doors shut. The Pitești experiment, torture as re-education. In communist Romania between 1949 and 1951, the Pitești prison became the site of what historians call the most terrible brainwashing experiment ever inflicted on the human mind. The Pitești experiment aimed to break political prisoners through systematic physical and psychological torture, forcing them to renounce their beliefs and betray fellow inmates. More than 600 students were victims. Guards beat prisoners with clubs, burned them with cigarettes, forced them to stand for days without sleep, and made them watch as cellmates were tortured. To survive, some were coerced into becoming torturers themselves, only to be later reclassified as prisoners and tortured in turn. At least 100 young people died in Pitești as a result of their injuries. The Romanian regime insisted it was necessary to eliminate counter-revolutionary thinking. After the prison closed, the state suppressed information. Only after the fall of communism did survivors speak out. In 2014, Pitești prison became a memorial, reminding visitors of the cruelty inflicted under the banner of ideological re-education. Reflection. The Pitești experiment underscores the dangers of absolute political power. When a regime seeks to control not only actions but thoughts, torture becomes a tool to mold reality itself. The experiment's sadistic cycle, turning victims into perpetrators, illustrates how oppression corrodes human solidarity. Kuru, cannibalism's deadly legacy. In the remote highlands of Papua New Guinea, the four people once practiced a unique ritual. When a family member died, relatives cooked and consumed the body, believing it allowed the spirit to live on. No part was wasted. Hands, feet, muscles, organs, and brain were eaten, sometimes after the body was buried for several days to let the flesh ripen. Women and children often consumed the brain, considered a delicacy. In the 1950s, anthropologists noted that many women and children were suffering from tremors, loss of coordination, and uncontrollable laughter. The illness, called Kuru, progressed rapidly. Victims lost the ability to stand or speak and usually died within a year. Researchers discovered that Kuru was caused by misfolded prion proteins, similar to those in Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, spread through ingestion of infected brain tissue. When authorities persuaded the four to stop endocannibalism in 1960, the incidence of Kuru declined, though cases still appeared decades later because the incubation period can exceed 50 years. Reflection. Kuru shows how deeply cultural practices can intersect with disease. For the four, eating loved ones was an act of respect, yet it transmitted a fatal pathogen. This story underscores the importance of understanding local customs when combating disease, and how hidden dangers can lurk in traditions passed down for generations. The Dyatlov Pass mystery. On a snowy February night in 1959, 9 hikers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute pitched their tent on the eastern slope of Massacre, the Mountain of the Dead. Led by experienced mountaineer Igor Dyatlov, the group planned a 16-day expedition. When they failed to return, search teams set out and found their tent cut open from the inside, its occupants' belongings still inside. Footprints in the snow led into the forest, where bodies were discovered in various states of undress, some wearing only underwear despite sub-zero temperatures. 2 bodies had fractured skulls and chest injuries. 1 woman's tongue and eyes were missing. Soviet investigators concluded the hikers died of hypothermia and closed the case, but the bizarre details sparked decades of speculation. Theories range from an avalanche to an infrasound-induced panic, a secret military test of nitric acid or rocket fuel causing the hikers to flee, or even paranormal explanations. Recent Russian studies suggest a slab avalanche may have forced the hikers out, but definitive evidence remains elusive. Each theory has holes, and the lack of clear answers keeps the Dyatlov Pass incident one of the most chilling outdoor mysteries. Reflection. Sometimes the most haunting stories come from natural forces. The Dyatlov Pass tragedy shows that even skilled adventurers can be humbled by the wilderness. Yet the uncertainty invites wild speculation, a reminder that when official narratives leave gaps, myth and conspiracy rush in to fill them. Jonestown, revolutionary suicide. On 18 November 1978, deep in the Guyanese jungle at a settlement called Jonestown, a loudspeaker crackled with the voice of Jim Jones, leader of the People's Temple. He urged his followers to drink a grape-flavored beverage laced with cyanide and sedatives. Over 900 men, women, and children, including around 300 children, complied. Jones framed the act as revolutionary suicide to protest the racism and hostility he claimed his movement faced. Moments before, Temple gunmen had murdered U.S. Congressman Leo Ryan and several journalists who visited to investigate allegations of abuse. Some Temple members resisted. Armed guards forced them to drink or injected poison into infants. Jones himself was found dead with a gunshot wound to the head. The massacre shocked the world and remains one of the largest intentional loss of American life before 9/11. It raised questions about cult dynamics, charismatic leadership, and the vulnerability of people seeking community and meaning. Reflection. Jonestown is a stark lesson in how absolute ideological loyalty can be weaponized to justify mass murder. It highlights the dangers of isolating communities under a single authority and ignoring warning signs of abuse. When faith becomes unquestioning devotion to a leader, tragedy can result. Holmesburg prison experiments, medical exploitation behind bars. While MKUltra targeted unwitting citizens, some doctors turned prisons into laboratories. At Holmesburg Prison in Philadelphia, dermatologist Dr. Albert Kligman ran experiments from the 1950s through the 1960s. He tested everything from skin creams and shampoos to radioactive isotopes and psychoactive drugs on incarcerated men, most of them black and poor, without proper informed consent. Prisoners were enticed with small payments but not told the nature of the substances. Some had their skin injected with caustic chemicals or slathered with unknown ointments that caused painful burns. Others participated in milkshake tests, drinking strange concoctions for months. Survivors later reported chronic gastrointestinal issues, hemorrhoids, and leathery, scarred skin. Kligman's work helped develop the acne drug Retin A, but the human cost was severe. Many participants suffered long-term health problems, and the psychological trauma of being treated as guinea pigs left deep scars. Reflection. The Holmesburg experiments illustrate a disturbing intersection of racism, poverty, and power. When society devalues certain lives, it becomes easy to justify using them as test subjects. Kligman's trials remind us that medical breakthroughs can be built upon the suffering of those who lack the means to say no. Guatemalan syphilis experiments, a diplomatic apology, decades too late. In 1946, U.S. Public Health Service doctors traveled to Guatemala with the stated aim of testing penicillin's ability to treat sexually transmitted infections. Over the next 2 years, they intentionally infected hundreds of Guatemalan prisoners, soldiers, and mental patients with syphilis and gonorrhea. To spread the diseases, researchers hired prostitutes carrying syphilis to sleep with inmates or directly inoculated subjects by applying bacteria to wounds or performing spinal punctures. The participants were not told they were part of an experiment and did not consent. Not all received treatment, even though penicillin's effectiveness was known. The study remained hidden until the 21st century, when historian Susan Reverby uncovered documents revealing the program. In 2010, U.S. President Barack Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton issued a formal apology to Guatemala for the outrageous and abhorrent experiments. The Guatemalan government launched its own investigation and demanded compensation. Reflection. The Guatemalan syphilis study underscores the arrogance of colonial medical research in the mid-20th century, where non-white bodies were used to test diseases under the guise of scientific advancement. Even though the U.S. apologized, many victims never received justice or adequate health care. Trust lost on such a scale is difficult to regain. Operation Sea Spray, biowarfare on a city. During the early Cold War, U.S. military scientists wanted to know how a foreign power might attack American cities with biological weapons. Rather than rely on simulations, they decided to spray live bacteria over an unsuspecting population. In September 1950, the U.S. Navy launched Operation Sea Spray, releasing Sriracha marcescens and Bacillus globigii from ships off the coast of San Francisco. Over 6 days, these bacteria drifted inland, and sampling equipment across the city showed widespread contamination. Sriracha was considered harmless, but within a week, 11 residents developed serious Sriracha infections, a rarity at the time. One patient, Edward Nevin, died after Sriracha infected his heart valve and caused an aneurysm. The public remained unaware until 1976, when a journalist uncovered the secret tests. Congress later learned that sea spray was only one of hundreds of open-air biological trials conducted across America until 1969. Reflection. Operation Sea Spray exemplifies the shocking disregard for public health in the pursuit of military knowledge. Spraying potentially pathogenic bacteria over a city without consent reveals a dangerous calculus, weighing the lives of civilians against hypothetical wartime scenarios. The experiment's secrecy only worsened the public's mistrust when it eventually came to light. Conclusion. From covert CIA LSD experiments to orphans manipulated into stuttering, from laundries where women labored until death to a re-education prison that turned victims into torturers, from ritual cannibalism spreading a deadly prion to hikers dying mysteriously on a Siberian mountain, from a cult's mass suicide to prison inmates used as medical guinea pigs and citizens unknowingly infected with diseases or sprayed with bacteria, the stories in this episode share a common thread. They reveal what happens when institutions, whether governments, churches, scientists, or cults, view individuals as expendable in pursuit of power, ideology, or knowledge. We tell these stories not to wallow in horror, but to bear witness and to remember. When we shine light on the darkest corners of history, we can learn to recognize the warning signs of abuse and exploitation. We can demand transparency, consent, and accountability from those in positions of authority. History's macabre chapters are unsettling, but ignoring them is far more dangerous. Until next time, stay curious and beware the shadows.